Stuka Joe here, and before we continue with this video of turn 6 and 7, we have to correct a mistake I made in turn 4. During the Shadows phase, the Hitler Surprise Visit card would give each player 1 franc for each force they would have at a landmark. And I confused Notre Dame with Invalide. So I treated Invalide throughout that turn as a landmark, and the weird thing is that in the video I pointed out the correct landmarks. So what happened was that during the recruitment phase, the fashion designer recruited an elite unit and placed it at Invalide as if it was a landmark. And during his turn, the Cabaret Impresario moved a unit to Invalide. And of course, no combat ensued because I was thinking all the time it was a landmark. Later, when it came the time to cash in on the extra francs, each of the factions, the police chief, the Cabaret Impresario, and the fashion designer received 1 additional franc. Now, the situation kind of corrected itself. In turn 5, the fashion designer moved the unit out of Invalide into a neighboring district. And notice that if that unit had been correctly placed at the Eiffel Tower, it could have reached that same location. And the chief of police moved his unit out of Invalide into the neighboring Avoir location. And similarly, if it had been correctly placed at the Eiffel Tower, it could have reached that location. So those are the mistakes that have to be corrected. And at the end of this video, you will see that I will deduct 1 franc for each of those 3 factions. So now, let's go on. We're about to start turn 6. In Streets of Shadows, and here we see the situation. The fashion designer has recruited strong forces to try to recover its headquarters at Montparnasse. The police chief also lost his headquarters to the journalist, and only the journalist and the Cabaret Impresario have complex dominance. So we see the tally of locations controlled by each player, and it is the chief of police and the Cabaret Impresario that are in the lead, each with 5 locations. The Cabaret Impresario had the initiative the last time, so we move the marker clockwise, and none of the first 2 players have tied for the lead, so it is the chief of police who will have the initiative in this turn. Now to the Shadows phase. And Cloak and Dagger. During plot resolution, each player gains 1 franc for each force that they have in an Abwehr location, and the Allied liberation marker will advance this turn. Here we see all 3 Abwehr locations, and the chief of police controls the location at Invalide, and the other 2 locations at Montmartre and the Tuileries are not controlled by any player. On to the income phase. Before we increase the number of francs for each of the factions, in the last turn during the plot resolution phase, I credited the Cabaret Impresario 7 francs for control of cabaret locations. It should have been 8, so now we add 1 more franc to the Cabaret Impresario's total. He has 8 at this time. Now we see the totals of francs. The Cabaret Impresario now has 13. That's a lot of francs. The fashion designer 5, the movie director 4, Chief of Police 3, and the journalist has 6. The Chief of Police will not recruit any units, leaving his 4 francs to purchase a card. The journalist will purchase 1 unit, and the unit is placed in the Paris Opera, which is near the Abwehr location at the Tuileries. Next, the Cabaret Impresario. He has a lot of money, and it is deceiving. He has 3 cards, but none of the cards are playable. These are all resistance cards, and his maximum hand size is 4. And with all this money, it is very likely that he can win 2 cards, but he would have to discard 1. But look at his ability. At the end of the bidding phase, he can discard an action card from his hand without playing it and draw a replacement card. But of course, that assumes that you're going to draw another card. So the Cabaret Impresario will purchase 3 units, spending 6 francs, and places all 3 units at Notre Dame. Next, the fashion designer has a hand size of 4 cards maximum, has already 3 cards. So he's going to purchase 1 unit, and that unit is placed at the Eiffel Tower in the district of Montparnasse. Next, the movie director has 4 francs. He won't be purchasing any units. Notice that he has that SOE contact card. If he controls any railroad station, he can examine all discarded action cards and select one. The movie director has 3 units at the fashion designer location at Montparnasse, and there's a train station in the same district. And he also has a unit at the Paris Opera, and there's another train station in the adjacent Tuileries district. But he won't spend any francs now to purchase units, leaving them to bid on cards. So next is the bidding phase. So we draw the 5 cards that will be auctioned. 2 treachery cards, a raid card, a denunciation card, and a curfew card. Let's see what this card does. The player chooses a landmark, and all tokens for all players in that landmark are moved to their faction's headquarters. And if a faction doesn't control their headquarters, they're moved to Gestapo prison. So it's an interesting card to play, and more so during these times where 2 of the players, the fashion designer as well as the chief of police, do not control their headquarters. So let's take a look at the results of the bidding on these cards. Since each player took a card, and a raid card was taken by the Cabaret Impresario, and the curfew card, which seems very interesting at this stage, was taken by the fashion designer. And we have a very interesting situation here. 2 of the factions have the maximum number of cards allowed. That's the fashion designer and the Cabaret Impresario. And one of the factions, the chief of police, has 3 denunciation cards, not a single suit card. On the other hand, we have the movie director, has that SOE contact card and 2 suit cards. And the only raid card is in possession of the Cabaret Impresario, but the Cabaret Impresario doesn't have any other suit card. So he can't really raid any enemy headquarters. Now it's the end of the bidding phase, and before proceeding to the player turn phase, the Cabaret Impresario will use his special skill. He can discard an action card from his hand without playing it, and he can draw 1 card from the deck. So he will discard 1 resistance card and draws 1 from the deck. Now it's a denunciation card. So he was hoping for a suited card, but no luck. So next is the player turn phase, and we start with the chief of police. The chief of police does have a special ability. He can play any suited card as a raids card. However, he doesn't have any suited cards. He has 3 denunciation cards. The chief of police thinks about taking advantage of that cloak and dagger shadows card and take control of that Avoir location here at Tuileries, but he would be undressing a saint to dress another one by moving his unit from the chief of police location there, and that chief of police location could be easily taken by enemy factions. The same situation occurs here at Invalides, where the police chief has a unit already in the Avoir location there, so that unit will stay put. And then the other units that the chief of police has are in Passy and Batignolles districts, so they can't reach that Avoir location in the Tuileries because they would have to stop upon entering a district which has enemy pieces. So the chief of police will not move. Next is the journalist. Journalist has control of the chief of police headquarters and is keeping an eyeball on those two Abwehr locations. The one here at Tuileries and the one here at Montmartre. And he will move his unit at the Paris Opera into the Abwehr location at Montmartre. And he will move a unit from the adjacent Ile de la Cité district from the chief of police headquarters that he captured into Tuileries to take control of that other Abwehr location in Tuileries. So the journalists control 2 of the 3 Abwehr locations. Next, the Cabaret Impresario. He has a full hand of 4 cards. Next is the Cabaret Impresario. He has 2 resistance, 1 denunciation card, and a raid card. So he will not be attacking this turn because he would have to burn that sole raid card. So he will try to capture as many locations as possible in order to go first in the next turn. So we start with the units at Notre Dame. 1 unit moves into the Latin Quarter where it has to stop, and it will stop at the Sorbonne location. Another unit will take the metro that you see here, and that unit will appear at La Villette district in this metro and will end here at Le Bourget Airport. And yet the other unit here at Notre Dame will also take the metro and will appear in the metro station here at the Opera district and will occupy the Jeu des Paumes location. And the Cabaret Impresario has more units here in his location at La Villette. Moves to the adjacent Montmartre location, has to stop because there's a journalist unit there, and will take control of the artist's quarter. And a unit moves from his headquarters into the train station at the adjacent Tuileries district. Now it's the fashion designer's turn, and notice that he has a full hand of cards. And he will have to play this curfew card to keep things flowing through his hand. And this card allows him to choose a landmark, and all tokens of all players there are moved to their respective headquarters, but if a faction doesn't control its headquarters, they go to Gestapo prison. So this curfew card only applies to landmarks. And right now there's no landmark that has more than 1 unit. The only landmark that I can see that has units is one controlled by the fashion designer at the Eiffel Tower, and the other is one controlled by the movie director at the Paris Opera. So that unit will be selected, and because the movie director has control of his headquarters, we place the unit at the movie director's headquarters at Bercy. Next is the movie director, and he will play the SOE contact card, and he can play it because he controls one of the railroad stations, the one at Tuileries. So this allows him to examine all discarded action cards and select one and place it in his hand. Here we see all discarded cards. And the movie director has a special ability that any suited card he can treat as an influence card. Now, the usual suspects is a very useful card because it can serve as any suited card. So that will be the card that he will select. Notice it can be used as a raids card also. So that's the card, and the movie director has 3 cards in his hand. He can hold 1 more. Movie director has only 8 units on the map, and those are in 3 locations. His headquarters at Bercy, the fashion designer location at Ménilmontant, and the fashion designer's headquarters at Montparnasse. The movie director only has 3 locations under his control. One is his headquarters, and 2 fashion designer locations. One is the fashion designer's headquarters. The movie director wants to take back his locations, and that's one location here at Montparnasse, controlled by the fashion designer, and the other one is the location at Batignolles. So he will move both units, the fashion designer's location at Ménilmontant, to the metro station, and from there they will appear in the metro station space at the Opera District, and we place them here in the Paris Opera, and that's within striking distance of the movie director location at Batignolles. And of course, the movie director won't leave that fashion designer space empty, so he will move one of his units from his headquarters into that district, Ménilmontant, specifically the fashion designer location. There were no conflicts in this turn. That's the end of the player turn phase. Now to the plot and turn resolution phase. And now we cash in on this cloak and dagger event, and each player gains a franc for each force they have in an Abwehr location. The Abwehr location at Invalides is controlled by the chief of police, so he receives 1 franc. And the journalist controls the Abwehr locations at Tuileries and Montmartre. That adds 2 more francs to his treasury. And now we move the liberation marker forward 1 space. And now the game enters into the mid-war stage. And now we will add the cards from the mid-war or B deck. So we remove all undrawn deck A cards. And now we will be drawing from deck B. Onto the initiative phase, and the Cabaret Impresario has 7 locations, followed by the journalist with 6. So the Cabaret Impresario has the initiative. And the Cabaret Impresario has a full hand of 4 cards. Next is the Shadows phase, and this will be the first card from deck B that we will be drawing in this game. German army parades in Paris. During the plot resolution, each player gains 1 franc for each force they have in a landmark location, and the liberation marker will not advance this turn. And from here we see all 4 landmarks: the Eiffel Tower, the Arc de Triomphe, Notre Dame, and the Paris Opera. Now to the income phase, and we collect income for each of the factions. And after receiving income, we see that the Cabaret Impresario has 8 francs, followed by the journalist with 6, and with 5 we have the chief of police and the movie director, and the fashion designer has 4. On to the recruit phase. Start with the initiative player. The Cabaret Impresario has a full hand of 4 cards. He has 8 francs, so he will spend 6 to purchase 3 units. They will be all going to landmark locations. So, 1 goes to Notre Dame, the 2nd goes to the Eiffel Tower, and the 3rd to the Arc de Triomphe. Next is the fashion designer. He has 4 francs and 3 cards. He can pick up 1 more card. He'll spend 2 francs to purchase a unit that will be placed at Notre Dame. Next is the movie director with 5 francs and 3 cards. He will also purchase 1 unit, and it is placed also at Notre Dame. Next is the police chief with 5 francs. He purchases 1 unit, which is placed at the Paris Opera. The journalists need cards, so they will not purchase any units in the hopes of being able to win 2 cards in the auctions. Now we move on to the bidding phase. We draw 5 action cards. There's 3 suit cards. And then there's the Berlin Axis and Roadblocks cards. The Berlin Axis card allows the player, if he controls the airport, to examine all discarded cards and pick 1. The Roadblock card allows the player to prohibit all other players from using the metro during one turn. So now we conduct the auction off camera, and the Cabaret Impresario will not be participating in the auction because he has the full allotment of 4 cards. Movie director also cannot bid because he has his full hand of 4 cards. And after a very interesting auction, the journalist won 3 cards, the Berlin Access, Roadblock, and 1 influence card with just the bid of 1 franc on that one. Meanwhile, the chief of police won 1 card, and the fashion designer also won. And that's because we had the situation that the movie director, as well as the Cabaret Impresario, from the start could not bid on any cards because they had full hands. And on we move to the player turn phase. And we start with the initiative player, the Cabaret Impresario. Cabaret Impresario has a hand that only has 1 suited card, and these other 3 cards are not playable at this time because their triggering events have not been activated by the Shadows deck. Now in this game you can create alliances or collaborations with other players, but that's only after a shadow card, which is the Air Raid card, is revealed. And that hasn't happened yet. And if there would have been an alliance in which the Cabaret Impresario was a part of, he could trade cards and francs between other allied factions. But for now, he's stuck with his hand. So the Cabaret Impresario will try to take advantage of the current shadow card, the German Army Parade. So he'll try to move as many of his units to landmark spaces. So this unit at the train station at the Tuileries is moved to the Opera House. On the other hand, the Cabaret Impresario doesn't want to leave unguarded his headquarters at République, so he will not move any of those 3 units there, nor the 2 units that he has at his location at La Villette. Now it's the fashion designer's turn. The fashion designer has a number of units in the movie director location at Montparnasse, so he will move his regular unit there to the Eiffel Tower. Now we go to the movie director. He has a full hand of cards. He has the usual suspects that can double as a card of any suit, and 3 other suited cards. So perhaps it's a good time to look for a fight, and the movie director is taking a close look at the journalist's location in the neighboring Latin Quarter. Of course, the problem is that the journalist has a hand of 4 cards, and notice that the journalist can have up to 6 cards in his hand, and that's the largest number of cards that one player can hold in this game. And if we would be playing a real face-to-face game, the information that the movie director would have is that the journalists have 4 cards, and it is easy to surmise that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 suited cards there. So the movie director won't be moving any units. He has already 3 units in landmark spaces, and he does not want to weaken the hard-earned locations that he has taken, like the fashion designer's former headquarters. Next is the chief of police. He has 4 cards. Maximum hand card size is 5. And the police chief has the fewest units on the board. He has a total of 5 units, although one of them is an elite unit, but they're not concentrated anywhere. He only holds 4 locations that are not landmarks. So moving a unit from one of these locations to a landmark is gonna deprive the police chief of that particular location. But the police chief really needs the money. He only has 1 franc, and he receives 3 per turn, which is the second lowest amount. So he will move his unit at Hotel Lorraine to the Arc de Triomphe, and his unit at the Abwehr location in Invalides will move to Notre Dame. Next is the journalist. He has this Berlin access card, but he doesn't control the airport, so it is unusable for now. The roadblock card is also pretty unusable because he's the last player in this turn, so he won't prevent anybody from using the metro anyway. Good news for the journalist is that he has a maximum hand card size of 6, and he has for now 4 cards. The journalist has 8 units on the board, and 2 of these are occupying the chief of police's headquarters. So the journalist doesn't want to weaken the units there in order to pick up some francs by moving units to landmarks. The journalist knows that for the next turn he will probably not have the initiative anyway, so he has to pick some francs. His income is the lowest in the game with 2, so he will move his unit in the Avoir location at Tuileries to the Paris Opera landmark. And he will do the same with the unit at the Avoir location at Montmartre, also to the Paris Opera. All other journalist units are either in journalist locations or in the chief of police's headquarters. So that's the end of the journalist turn. Now we move on to the plot and turn resolution phase. Now we effect this event, and each player gains 1 franc for each force they have in a landmark location. You see 2 fashion designer and 1 Cabaret Impresario units at the Eiffel Tower, 1 Cabaret Impresario and 1 police chief unit at the Arc de Triomphe, 1 for each player except the journalists at Notre Dame. And here we see the units at Paris Opera. When we total all units in landmark spaces, the Cabaret Impresario earns 4 francs, the chief of police, movie director, and fashion designer 3, and the journalist 2. Now we add those francs to each of the players' treasuries. And after adding up the income for all of the sides, the Cabaret Impresario has 6 francs, the chief of police and the movie director 4, the fashion designer has 3, and the journalist 2. And the liberation marker does not move as a result of this shadows card, so it remains in the number 5 box, which is the first box of the mid-war stage. And as we stated at the beginning of this video, in turn 5, we treated Invalides as a landmark, and as a result, the fashion designer, chief of police, and Cabaret Impresario each received 1 franc. So now we will deduct 1 franc from each of these factions. Better late than never. That's the end of the 7th turn here in Streets of Shadows. We see the factions slowly building up their units. Still, there has been no need to play denunciation or resistance cards. There's been no air raids, no alliances by any of the players. So stick around for the next 2 turns of Streets of Shadows. And this is Stuka Joe signing off for now. Thanks for watching.